Chapter 8 is about the best practices for ethics reporting systems, and there are 9 benchmark items. Benchmark item number 32. Managers welcome employee discussions about ethical issues. We can all probably think of a manager who, as soon as you raise, I don't think that's ethical, they just run away. They don't want to talk about it, they don't want to discuss it. And that's not helpful because that just creates employee silence because people don't want to alienate their managers. So instead, you want to make sure that managers are trained to say, I'm happy to discuss those issues with you. Come to my office. I'm really curious to know about what's going on. So people feel welcome to share this information. And the more welcome they are, then the more likely they'll share things that they're hesitant to share. Because once again, a lot of people are very hesitant to talk about unethical things going on at work because they don't want to be considered to be a squealer or a stooge or anything like that. So you want to be able to welcome people to say, I'm open for these kinds of discussions. Benchmark number 33. Managers welcome input from employees about ethical misconduct. So we've got ethical issues in general. Let's talk about the ethics of our pricing policy. Ethical misconduct is a little bit more severe, where an employee says, I want to talk to you about some theft that I've seen taking place in this organization. So those are much more sensitive issues, and managers need to be trained on how to welcome people and how to be accepting to address those sorts of issues. Even bodily language is so important. If you flinch or if you blink or if you see the manager start getting a little bit nervous, employees are going to say, this manager doesn't want to hear this. Also, what happens in some organizations is that managers shoot the messenger, where somebody says, I want to share this information, and instead they accuse the employee that brought the information of the wrongdoing. If you shoot the messenger and if you blame the messenger, then the messengers won't arrive at your doorstep, and instead you're going to be hit with a huge financial loss or a lawsuit, and you're going to wonder, why didn't anybody tell me about the sexual harassment that was taking place? Well, it might have been because the last time somebody raised that issue, the manager yelled at them and said, that's not taking place, or the manager was just in denial about it, rather than being curious or wondering, tell me about the situation and how you think it takes place and what we ought to do about it. As a manager, when somebody comes to your office with a problem, oftentimes they've already thought about the solution. So you don't have to be ready with the solution. If somebody comes up to me if I'm their manager and they say, by the way, there's some sexual harassment that takes place, I don't have to solve that problem right away because the employee probably thought about this. And I just have to flip the problem on the employee and say, how do you think this should be managed? And oftentimes the employee has great ideas that you should consider in terms of implementing as a strategy. Benchmark item number 34. A specific person, such as an ethics and compliance officer or ombudsman, is accountable for managing our organization's ethics program. At this point, we're talking about larger organizations. You certainly don't need an ethics program if you're a small business. That's because you see each other all the time. When you see each other all the time, you're observing each other's interactions, and therefore, you're the boss. You have a good feel for how everybody's behaving on the job. But when you grow to be about 20 employees, and then 100 employees, and then about 500 employees, and if you're really lucky, thousands of employees, there's a lot of things that go on in the organization that you have no knowledge about. So therefore, you're going to want to have a more extensive ethics program, and you want to make sure somebody is in charge of it. Once again, as I mentioned with diversity, if everybody is responsible for it, oftentimes nobody is really responsible for it because they all think somebody else is doing something about it. So you want your employees to know, I see this ethical misconduct taking place. I know I need to talk to person X. I need to go to Mary. She's the ethics officer. I need to go to Tom. He's the ethics officer. As the ethics officer, you want to be respondent. You want to be accepting of the information that's being provided to you. This benchmark also mentions ombudsmen. Ombudsmen are unique situations, usually in larger organizations or in government. The ombudsman has a legal responsibility to represent the employee that's sharing the information and taking that information up to the appropriate person in higher level management. The ombudsman doesn't solve the problem. The ombudsman doesn't doubt what's being told him or her. Instead, the ombudsman has to share that information with the manager who is ultimately responsible for that area of operations. Benchmark item number 35. Our organization's ethical reporting policy is clearly communicated to employees. I've had government officials in my business ethics MBA class, and I'll ask them, so what kind of ethics reporting system do you have? And they'll say, well, I know one exists, but I can't tell you anything about it. And then they go on the internet and they go searching for it, and they're having a hard time following it. That's not a best practice. Instead, you want to make sure that all the employees know this is the ethics policy that's in place, and this is the system you have in place, so they know what to do in those high stress situations, high anxiety situations, when they want to use that system. Benchmark number 36. An internal reporting system exists for our employees to confidentially raise ethical issues and receive ethical clarification. It's very scary for an employee to go to a manager and say another employee is stealing from the organization. You want to make sure that you're the manager, that this information that's being shared with you will be held in confidence, that it won't leak out who told you this information, and you'll make sure that it's impossible to trace. Because if it's confidential, then you want to keep it confident, and you want to have the confidence of the employees. If employees believe that your confidence is being violated, then they're not going to share this information with the manager. So you want to make sure that you're somebody that can be trusted with confidence by the people coming to your office. Benchmark item number 37. An internal system exists for our employees to anonymously report potential ethical wrongdoing. Being anonymous is different than confidentiality. Confidentiality is an employee comes up to you and says, let me tell you what's happening. Sometimes employees are very afraid of doing that because they're afraid of retaliation. They have to work with this person all the time that might be stealing. So in that case, you want to make sure that you have a system in place where somebody can anonymously report, by the way, theft is occurring at the warehouse. And you want to create this system typically through an internet system where people can provide this valuable information in a way that's not traceable to anybody at all. At Edgewood College, we have an ethics reporting system that is computerized, and I'm one of the recipients if an ethical violation takes place in a certain area. If that does happen, basically, I can then tell the anonymous person, by any chance can we meet and discuss this in person? And if the person says no, that's fine and dandy, then nothing gets done. In terms of finding out who is providing this information, the key thing is that I'm a manager, and now I've gotten this red flag item that something is worthy of investigation. Even if it's anonymous, when it's done on the internet, I can still reply to the person through this anonymous system and say, here's the investigation I conducted, and by the way, what you reported wasn't the whole story, and it's much more complicated by this, and this is why it was okay for that person to take that product home that particular day. And then people say, this is a very ethical organization, and now I understand why things get done in a certain way. Benchmark item number 38. Employee requests for confidentiality are honored. And I kind of hinted about this earlier with a different benchmark. So you want to make sure that people can convey things confidentially, but you want to then also make sure that indeed that confidentiality has been honored. As I said earlier, if you breach that confidentiality, then nobody's going to come to your office and share anything in confidence, because the rumor mills will spread quickly and people will say you can't trust that person on confidential information. So you want to make sure that it is really is honored and it doesn't leak out. Benchmark item number 39, employees who purposely submit a false accusation are disciplined. This happens in very rare instances, but sometimes, say 2 employees might not like one another, and therefore one employee decides to get even with this person or try to get the person fired by falsely accusing them of wrongdoing. If that ever happens, it's essential that you make sure that the person who falsely accused another person is disciplined for doing that. Otherwise, you will damage the entire ethics reporting system. So it has to be clear that the ethics reporting system can only be used for situations that are very truthful and honest in terms of what wrongdoing has taken place. The last benchmark item in this chapter is there is zero tolerance for retaliation against whistleblowers. So let's say an employee blows the whistle about theft taking place in their work unit. After some action is taken place, maybe a retaliation takes place, and that employee that blew the whistle might get demoted, or they might get allocated to some other job that they don't want to have, or maybe nobody will talk to them at lunchtime, or maybe in the parking lot their tires might get sliced. So you want to make sure that there is absolutely no retaliation for people that internally or externally blow the whistle. If retaliation does take place, once again, employees are going to be tempted to remain silent rather than share confidential information that really is essential to know if you want to have a well-run organization.